In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd searching for a lost goat threw a rock into a cave near the Dead Sea and heard something break. Inside, he found ancient clay jars containing scrolls that would turn out to be one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. The Dead Sea Scrolls. Nearly 1,000 documents, including the oldest known copies of the Hebrew Bible, dating back over 2,000 years. For 75 years, scholars have debated basic questions about them. Were they all written by one isolated religious community? Were some of them forged? Do the fragments that seem to belong together actually come from the same original scroll? In 2020, a team of scientists tried something no one had attempted before. They extracted DNA from the animal skin the scrolls were written on. And what they found didn't just answer old questions. It raised entirely new ones. Welcome back to the hidden archive where history hides its secrets. Today we are looking at one of the most significant religious and archaeological discoveries in history and the DNA science that just rewrote what we know about it. Subscribe if you're new. A new mystery every week. Section 1, What the Scrolls Actually Are. Between 1947 and 1956, archaeologists and Bedouin searchers discovered fragments of approximately 900 to 1,000 different manuscripts in 11 caves near the site of Qumran, on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea in the West Bank. The scrolls date from roughly the 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD, making them, in many cases, over 2,000 years old. They include the oldest surviving copies of almost every book of the Hebrew Bible, some copied more than 1,000 years earlier than any previously known biblical manuscript. They also include religious texts not found in the standard biblical canon, community rules, calendars, and other documents that give historians an extraordinarily detailed window into Jewish religious life and thought in the centuries around the time of Jesus. Most scholars have traditionally connected the scrolls to a Jewish religious sect called the Essenes, believed to have lived at the nearby settlement of Qumran, a strict, communal group that some historians believe withdrew from mainstream Jewish society to live a life of purity and religious devotion. But this connection and many other basic facts about the scrolls has been debated by scholars for decades, largely because the physical evidence connecting specific scroll fragments to specific origins has always been frustratingly incomplete. The problem with fragments. Here is the central challenge that has frustrated Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship for 75 years. Almost none of the scrolls survived intact. Most exist today only as fragments, sometimes thousands of tiny pieces per original document that had to be painstakingly reassembled like an ancient, incomplete jigsaw puzzle, based primarily on handwriting style, textual content, and physical characteristics of the parchment like color and thickness. This reconstruction process is inherently uncertain. Scholars have long disagreed about whether certain fragments genuinely belong to the same original scroll, or whether they simply look similar by coincidence. The scrolls were written primarily on parchment, made from processed animal skin, usually sheep or goat. And this is where modern genetic science saw an opportunity that had never been available before. If fragments assumed to come from the same scroll actually came from different animals entirely, that would be strong evidence the traditional groupings were wrong. And conversely, if fragments assumed to be unrelated turned out to share genetic markers, that could reveal previously unknown connections. The 2020 DNA study. In 2020, a research team led by Israeli scientist Odette Rechavi at Tel Aviv University, in collaboration with researchers from the Israel Antiquities Authority, published groundbreaking results in the journal Cell, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. The team extracted tiny DNA samples from dozens of scroll fragments, being extremely careful to avoid damaging the invaluable and irreplaceable manuscripts. Extracting usable ancient DNA from parchment that is 2,000 years old is technically extraordinarily difficult. The genetic material degrades significantly over time, and centuries of handling introduce contamination risks from every archaeologist, scholar, and museum worker who has touched the fragments since 1947. Despite these challenges, the team successfully sequenced genetic material from multiple fragments, and the results were immediately significant. First, they confirmed that the vast majority of the parchment came from sheep, but a smaller portion came from cows, an animal not typically associated with the Qumran region's local ecosystem at the time, which is far better suited to sheep and goat herding than cattle raising. This was the first major surprise. Cowskin parchment suggested some scrolls may not have originated locally in the Judean desert region at all, potentially indicating scrolls were being brought to the Qumran caves from other locations entirely. The fragments that didn't match. The second, and arguably more significant, discovery involved specific fragments long assumed by scholars to belong to the same original scroll. Two fragments of the Book of Jeremiah, found in different caves and long grouped together by scholars based on similar handwriting and textual style, were tested and their DNA revealed they came from two genetically distinct sheep. This doesn't necessarily mean the fragments have completely unrelated content or origins, but it does mean the physical parchment pieces did not come from the same animal, and therefore very likely did not originate from the exact same original scroll, as had long been assumed. This finding suggests something remarkable. There may have been multiple different versions or editions of the Book of Jeremiah circulating and preserved at Qumran simultaneously, each written on parchment from different animals, possibly at different times or by different scribal communities, rather than one single authoritative text that scholars had long assumed represented the Qumran version. This has significant implications for biblical scholarship. It suggests a Jewish scriptural tradition, even in this remote desert community, that was more textually diverse and less standardized in this period than most scholars had previously assumed, with multiple variant versions of biblical texts potentially existing and being valued simultaneously, rather than a single fixed, authoritative text. The broader implications. The DNA evidence has also reopened questions about exactly who wrote and used the scrolls, and where they truly came from. The presence of cattle hide parchment, genetically distinct from local sheep populations, raises the possibility that at least some scrolls were transported to Qumran from other Jewish communities elsewhere in the region rather than being produced exclusively by an isolated local sect, as the traditional Essene theory suggests. This aligns with a growing body of scholarly opinion, developed over the past 2 decades, that the scrolls may represent a broader, more diverse collection of Jewish religious literature from multiple communities across ancient Judea, deliberately gathered and hidden at Qumran, likely for safekeeping during the turbulent period of the Jewish revolt against Rome between 66 and 73 AD, rather than being the exclusive religious library of one single isolated sect living permanently at the site. Dr. Rechavi and his colleagues have been careful and appropriately cautious about overstating their conclusions, noting that this was a limited pilot study involving a relatively small number of fragments, and that much more extensive genetic testing across the full collection will be needed before scholars can draw firm, comprehensive conclusions about scroll origins. But the initial results have already meaningfully shifted scholarly discussion, suggesting the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls may be considerably more complex, and involve considerably more communities and origins, than the traditional single-sect narrative that dominated popular understanding for over half a century. The twist. Here is the twist that has emerged from this genetic research, and it connects to an uncomfortable modern controversy. The same genetic testing techniques being refined for legitimate Dead Sea Scroll fragments have also played a critical role in exposing one of the biggest scandals in recent biblical archaeology. Beginning in 2002, a wave of previously unknown Dead Sea Scroll fragments began appearing on the antiquities market and were purchased by major institutions, including most notably the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., which acquired 16 fragments believed to be genuine additions to the historical collection. In 2020, the same year as the DNA study, a team of independent researchers using advanced imaging technology, chemical analysis, and physical examination determined that all 16 fragments held by the Museum of the Bible were modern forgeries, created using ancient, genuinely blank pieces of leather that had been deceptively inscribed with text mimicking the ancient scrolls, in some cases specifically to match well-known biblical passages that would attract high prices from buyers and museums. The forgeries had fooled multiple experts for years before more rigorous scientific analysis exposed them. DNA analysis, similar in principle to the technique used on the genuine scrolls, has now become one of several critical scientific tools scholars use specifically to help authenticate genuine ancient fragments and identify sophisticated modern forgeries in an antiquities market that continues to be plagued by fraud. The same science revealing the complex, multi-community origins of the genuine scrolls is also now our best defense against an ongoing wave of increasingly sophisticated fakes. Closing. The Dead Sea Scrolls have been studied for 75 years, translated, debated, and revered as one of the most important archaeological and religious discoveries in human history. And in 2020, a small amount of ancient DNA extracted from 2,000-year-old animal skin proved that we still don't fully understand where they came from, who wrote them, or how many distinct communities may have contributed to this extraordinary collection. The DNA didn't close the case on the Dead Sea Scrolls. If anything, it opened up new and more complicated questions than scholars had before, while simultaneously giving us powerful new tools to separate the genuine ancient texts from modern forgery. Some mysteries, even backed by the most advanced modern science, only get more fascinating the closer you look. What do you think the DNA evidence reveals about who really wrote the scrolls? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the Hidden Archive, a new mystery, every week, where history hides its secrets. End.